Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have a very special guest on today just to share with you some of his background. Over 25 years of helping promising startup growth and public companies increase sales and market dominance in the United States and abroad internationally. His operational experience covers areas such as business development, product commercialization, branding, digital marketing, sales, e-com, distribution, and building strategic industry and investor relationships. His personal efforts have generated over $100 million in sales, contributed to 2 exits, 1 acquisition, and an IPO. Greg has also helped lead over $70 million in private financing for early stage growth companies and real estate projects. He has also assisted in bringing innovative technologies to the Veterans Health Administration. Please welcome my next guest, the Managing Director at Purim Ventures, the one and only Greg Downey. How you doing today, Greg?
Hey, man, I appreciate the warm introduction.
Dude, I'm excited about this conversation because one of the things that I found so interesting about your background, and you have been in the biotech life sciences industry basically since your inception, right? You've been in it for a long time. And what I find so interesting, you co-founded, you looked at this here, orthopedics, currently the largest international orthopedic company solely focused on providing innovative solutions for children with musculoskeletal conditions. I try to say that as properly as possible. But my question is, what gravitated you toward this industry?
Into life sciences in particular, or into startups?
Into life sciences. What was that passion that kind of erupted in you that was like, hey, I love this kind of this vertical, this industry, and then we'll get into the startups.
Certainly. No. So when I was a wee lad back in college, I had a mentor who I knew when I went to high school and boarding school, and he was a very successful entrepreneur, no college education, but had made a lot of money, had built a bunch of different companies and a bunch of different verticals. So that was kind of my initial inspiration for business. But he got involved, and believe it or not, in a network marketing company. Right. And it was at the time they were deregulating the telco industry. And so he said, hey, you want to do this? And so I said, look, if you want me to clean your garbage cans, I'll do whatever it takes. I just want to, be around, because he had mentored other young people. So that initially got me into it. So my senior year in college, I didn't spend a single weekend. I was conducting meetings, trainings. It really was, I didn't make a ton of money in the network marketing thing, but it was a great sales 101 training, so to speak. So anyways, in that group, I was leading, like there were lawyers in the audience, doctors, it's really interesting from that exposure. But one of the people in particular was a medical sales rep for division of Johnson & Johnson. And so I didn't know that existed. Like I was graduated in 96, right? So I've dated myself. But at that time if you graduated in sales and marketing or business degree, it was, consulting or, sell insurance, right? And I didn't want to do either. So when I met this guy, he told me he worked from home. He had a company car. He worked in the OR with doctors. And I was like, well, what? Like, you don't have a medical degree? And so it's one of those things where it's this industry that they didn't tell you about in college. Like college doesn't tell you about a lot of things, but that's what exposed me to it. So I just really kind of was persistent with this guy, harped on him. He finally submitted and introduced me to his manager. And they normally don't hire people right out of college. You usually have to go sell copiers or something you don't like and earn your stripes. But I managed to be persistent. That's a key element. And got an interview, right? And got into medical sales early on. So it was using innovative technologies, teaching physicians in the OR. So you get exposed to a lot of great stuff. You don't have to go to, 5, 6, 8 years of medical school, right? So that's what really got me into it. And then the innovation that I saw, because the company was a subsidiary of Ethicon Endosurgery, started in women's health. And that's where I got to see this innovation come to play and how things got spun out of university, because this technology came out of Stanford. It was game changing. So that was, I tell everybody, was my, I don't know if you call it a false impression of startups, because you usually don't start with Johnson & Johnson, $40 million and their logo and all that kind of stuff, or technology from Stanford. So that's what got me into life sciences, was love the technology, love the innovation, and you can also make a lot of money. So that was a nice combination.
So bringing this fast forwarding now, what I found so interesting is I've talked to a lot of investors, and of course AI and ML, there's a lot of capital being deployed in that vertical. But life sciences is right up there. there's a lot of activity, a lot of excitement around this industry. And I'm curious, why do you think that is? I've got my perspective on it, but I'd love to get yours because I see that growing and continuously growing on an annual basis in regards to more capital being deployed in this vertical. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's just information, right? It's if you can amalgamate what is normally disparate information in different silos. So different hospital systems, different doctors' offices, nobody's communicating. There's a huge advantage to having all that data come together in a precise way and be analyzed, right? Machine learning, artificial intelligence is now what we call it. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I have a friend of mine that started a company that does GI work, right? So he has software that can be deployed into the GI space. So they're using these flexible scopes to go, down your throat or up the other side. But all that data has typically been held in that particular doctor silo or in that hospital system. But if you have a company and that data can roll up through the cloud and into this system, now imagine this company that has not only the software, but now they have the predictive analytics to where they're taking thousands and thousands of these medical records and be able to predict things based off patterns, right? So in healthcare, that's just one of many, many examples of where machine learning and AI can be a huge advantage, just because again, you have so much data to crunch and how to pull data from multiple sources and make sense of it. I think is where we're going to see kind of the future of medicine.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've talked to some individuals offline and the archaic side of things of how these things run in systems. And that's why I think there's been so much innovation because there's so much arbitrage and so much opportunity in this, healthcare or life sciences industry overall. So coming around to Pure Ventures, you guys have been able to facilitate a mastermind that is almost like an accelerator, right? It infuses a lot of amazing companies to really facilitate a lot of that baseline, that foundation a lot of founders need to then really jumpstart into whether it's capital raising or just Rolodex or marketing or all sorts of different things, right? A lot of different verticals and establishing it. And my question with Per Ventures is when you were building this out, the kind of really very very active role that you take with the founders, where did that come from? Has that always been kind of your thesis, or has it been more of just kind of an evolution?
It's really kind of been the genesis of what happened with Perm Ventures. It was, I stepped down from a board and a company that I was a shareholder in 2010 and didn't really have a plan. And it was a bunch of companies and investors in the previous company came to going, hey, now that you're free, can you help us out? And what seemed to, I see clear patterns, right? That's what I say a gift, right? I can see things and how to connect dots in a unique way. Everybody has their specialty. That's one of mine, but it's going looking at there always seemed to be a gap between the founders and the CEOs in the investment community. And I learned this firsthand when we raised, we did 3 private placements for our company, we raised 19 million. This is early in my, this is 2008, 2009. So this is, a while ago. But through that process, it was going to the wrong meetings, not really knowing where to go based off the size of the company, the structure of the investment, what we need, how much money, because nobody was really there to tell you. It's like you got to these meetings that you're all excited about to go to the Bay Area and you finally got your meeting with the big VC. And now knowing what I know, it's like, that was a complete waste of time. But they'll look at your stuff. They're doing intel as well and part of their due diligence, but just saw a gap of having a team surrounded around either physicians who are busy on a day-to-day basis, but putting teams around them so you can commercialize their ideas and their technologies and take them forward. They can keep their day job. They can keep better equity. It's really someone watching out for you, so to speak. And, not having that is one of those things of now that I'm here in my career and have a lot of experience doing these startups is going, that's a key element that venture typically doesn't offer. Most VCs don't offer that type of stuff. They'll look at your stuff and either it's a, hey, it's not a good fit, or come back when you're ready for your next round, or when it's just when you're doing early stage companies, specifically early stage, you kind of need the money now, right? So, and a lot of the times they're not telling you, hey, you had a wart here, or your team seemed light here, or we don't quite understand your supply chain, or your IP wasn't very, they don't typically give that type of information. So by then you've already exposed yourself. You've already gone to the dance. You've already shown them what you have, and it's too late. First impressions are huge. So my philosophy is if we can get into that early before you're out there bumping your head against with these investors, and make sure that you stand out. Everything's dialed in so you look like a rock star, because I've seen a lot of deals come across my plate, even people that have raised money in the past. And you'd be surprised on how, call it sloppy, but it's just you look at this stuff through a magnifying glass. And so bringing that combination with passionate founders that have good teams that know what they know, but also know what they don't know and want to accelerate the process, that's where we're a good fit.
Well, it's so correct, because I've seen so many founders where whenever you guys go on another path, there's a learning curve naturally, and you got to hit your head against the wall 1,000 different times, and then there you find patterns and say, okay, well, we're going to adjust and optimize. And what's so nice is you guys come alongside them and basically clamp that time frame so they don't have to hit their head 1,000 times, because you've already hit your head 1,000 times. You know what works, you know what doesn't work, you know what the investor's looking for, what they aren't, how to modify it so that you obviously optimize that time of the pitch, right? Making sure that that first impression is the most optimal situation and everything's dialed in, the story and everything like that. And I'm curious on this, because you talk about helping businesses in the development, the product commercialization, the branding, digital marketing, sales, e-com distribution, and building strategic industry, and and even investor relationships as well. That's a lot going on, right? And I'm curious, kind of just getting a heartbeat. When you're working with a lot of your founders, what have you noticed are the big key pillars that they struggle with the most, would you say? Is it now because of the macroeconomy, just investor relations and, raising capital? Or is it more of just saying, hey, you know what, building out that simplicity of, you know, being a salesperson, telling the story, explaining that, whatever that looks like, or opening up those doors? What have you noticed thus far that are kind of the big pillars that hold a lot of founders back?
Well, some of the big pillars, I mean, it's a great question. Some of the big pillars that we see is, one, are they coachable, right? Yeah, sometimes when you're so close to something and you've been doing it for years, you know where all the pieces are, right? You know the extreme detail. It's knowing what your skill set is and where you're weak, right? And if you're coachable and can surround yourself with smarter people. Like when a few of these companies that we've started in the past, like you may not have that industry expertise, but we surround ourselves with really smart people and we listen to them. I've seen that happen. I've got a series that we're launching here in the next couple of weeks called Founderitis, because of all this stuff that we've seen. And a lot of it is, are you humble enough? And I think humble is a loosely defined word, but it's just, I think you talk to leaders at the top that have done companies over and gone through. There's always peaks and valleys with every company. It's never unicorns and raindrops or gumdrops, right? It's just it's a battle. You got to be prepared for it, but it's going to surround yourself with smarter people, know what your strengths are, and be focused, right? We see some of these companies just take a very broad perspective of the market. Like, you need to know how big your market is, that's a given, but where are you going to generate revenue the fastest? Show me how you're going to use your money and get from point A to point B. That's one. And also messaging. It's, again, with technical opportunities, which we see a lot of them, you can get so deep into the weeds very quickly. And even though it makes sense to the founders because they're in it, they've lived it, that's their industry, to an investor, you've got to keep it really simple and you've got to really get to the point. And we see a lot of opportunities that come across our desk that, you have to really kind of dig into what are they actually doing? Like what, and then it's what's the go-to-market strategy? What's the messaging, the use of funds, your valuation, structure of the investment? I mean, all these different things where if you don't have that experience, it could be overwhelming and you can get stuck in this analysis paralysis mode and then you're losing time. So it's usually a combination of things. To summarize it would be, getting out of your own way, bringing in good people, and making sure your materials, your message, everything is really dialed in with the investor in mind. And know that you're going up against, 30 companies that month, right? So you've got to be able to stand out, be precise. And that's where I think our experience in branding, marketing, and messaging and commercialization, because that's really how Perm started, was a venture firm focused on fixing and building companies. We've done turnarounds, we've done M&A, we've done all that type of stuff. Combining that with the experience of raising capital for difficult ventures I think, sets us apart from most.
Mm-hmm. You say something I want to double click on, where you're saying really optimized where the money is going, right? And making sure that you're deploying that or infusing that capital into the business in the proper metrics and proper things. Definitely within today's world where there's not as much capital, and that may change with the next few years, whatever, we don't know, but there's just not as much flowing capital around. So you got to be efficient with the money that you do have, because you don't know when the next capital raise is and when that next check is going to come in. So my question with that, what data, or how do you determine from the data that you have in the company, which maybe you don't have much data, maybe all you have is just some clients, or maybe with some potential clients, or maybe some clients that have, or maybe some email list or whatever, right? How do you determine what data you're looking at to determine where you're going to infuse that capital when you have raised that capital?
Well, there's specific categories. When you look at like a pro forma of a company, you've got your top line revenue, you've got your expenses, you got your profits, your EBITDA, right? You want to be able to make sure you cover those categories. We've seen crazy spreadsheets on companies before where it has all this data in it, but I want to see it distilled down into a very concise pro forma that answers those questions, right? So one is the financials. Two, it's if it's a manufactured good, do they have an agreement with the manufacturer, right? Because you can guess on what it's going to cost to make it. But what we like to see, and we've helped companies do this, is get them in line with the right manufacturing partners, have backup manufacturing, but at least get a couple bids so you have an idea of what it's going to cost, right? Then you want your headcount, obviously legal, and then the other big thing that we look at is marketing, right? So when you launch a company, especially if you have a lot of technologically minded founders, they're focused on the technology. They want to iterate. It goes back to the whole MVP. Like, you got to get your product out, right? It's never going to be perfect, but at least get it out, right? Get it out in the market. But the thing that we often see is a lack of marketing. Like, oh, I'm going to build this widget, and distributor's going to pick it up, or I'm going to sell it, everybody's going to love it, and it's going to be great. It's like, no. The general rule of thumb that we look at is going, do your whole budget, including marketing, but put your whole budget together, and then look at what are you spending on marketing. General rule of thumb is 15 to 20% of your overall budget should be allocated for marketing, minimum. And I don't care really what industry you're in, but investors, when I look at stuff from an investment standpoint, it's going, if marketing is low, that's immediate red flag. You're going to need some help. And the other thing too is, I think people, when they put these financials together, it's just kind of the engine of the company. It's like, yeah, you can do some pretty slides and show what you're going to do, but how does this make sense financially? And we've had a lot of companies that we work with either pivot or figure out a better way of doing things to where their financials make a lot of sense and get attractive, right? But it's going, what elements do you need to bring together to make this thing happen? Legal, IP, distribution, marketing, sales, and also the team, right? It's a lot of folks. I've seen different opportunities where the CEO was, pre-revenue company, had himself listed as a $300,000 employee. It's like, okay, red flag. Like, if you're a huge chunk of the equity in your pre-revenue, that stops the conversation. So there's a range where you want to be at. That makes sense, where we don't want you starving. We don't want you having to carry a second job at Starbucks to make your startup work, right? It's just, you need to be financially sober in what that looks like. So it's sound, right? Because these investors, it's not just, someone's going to put money into your company and you're going to lose a chunk of your company. Like, you got to get out of that mindset. It's like, these investors are partners, and they could be a godsend for what you're trying to do. They're look at them as allies, and have good terms, but it's making sure you're bringing them in and thinking of what would you want if you were cutting a check into this company and you didn't really know these people, right? So it's getting yourself out of your own head and putting yourself in the mindset of the investor is critical, but it doesn't really come unless you have that experience, right? So that's a kind of a catch-22, if you will. You got to have the experience. If you don't have the experience, find some people around you that do have that experience, and take and let them vet your deal and poke holes in it, and don't get offended by it. Just try to get up and rebuild and make it stronger.
Yeah, and it's I was talking to another founder, and specifically on this point, it was actually interesting because he wanted me to help raise capital because of my Rolodex and so forth, and it was interesting facilitating this. But I did not, because the founder was like, well, the main reason is because I wanted to raise X amount of dollars so then I can take that $250,000 salary plus my other co-founder, whatever. And I said, that's going to deplete a lot of the resources, right, very quickly. And that was kind of a red flag. So I just want to reiterate, there are people like that that say that, and that is a big red flag for a lot of investors that don't want to facilitate any relationships, because you got to think long term. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Also, what I found interesting, what you were talking about, when you, I know there's a lot of factors that go into, the product development, as well as, portion of the money should be allocated toward marketing, sales, to make sure that there is efficiency, and gather that data, and you optimize and you iterate. I think you use the word iteration, which I like. Iterating your approach as you gather more data and more data. But I want to ask you this, because a lot of founders, as your business grows, from pre-rev to, some rev to, mid seven figures to eight figures and beyond, it's tough to work with A players or hire A players at a C salary, right? And so there's ways to negotiate maybe some equity, maybe some, performance, revenue structure of some sort. I found very interesting to get A players into a founding company. There are a lot of creative ways where they structure the salary compensation to ensure that you can get some amazing people on, like you were talking about, so you can really have a well-established team that can help you scale the whole company forward. I'm curious, what have you seen that has helped, attract A players, you know, but you have to be creative in regards to the structure and the way you think about it. Definitely when you don't have as much, where, compared to a Walmart or compared to these other Fortune 500 companies, or Apple or Google, that can, say, hey, I can, $500,000, 750, $1 million easily. And, health insurance and all these other perks and stuff like that. So you are fighting against some of the corporate, but I found some really interesting things about how they creatively, develop these structures. So I want to ask you, what have you noticed is most effective when you're hiring A players?
Best one is, and this is kind of there's two ways to answer it. The first one is, when you're looking at A players, and I've done this before, right? A lot of this is experience driven, but we hired, in a previous venture of ours, we hired some guys that looked guys and gals that looked great on paper, corporate backgrounds and all this type of stuff, great in the corporate environment. We thought, ideally, let's plug them into our company and it's going to be, awesome. Well, it wasn't, because startups aren't for everybody. And sometimes when you pull these experts with these really impressive bios, one, everybody writes their own bio, right? So you take that for a grain of salt, confirm and verify. But when you look at, sometimes when you plug these people in, they're used to having 30 to 40 reports, right? They're used to having a large budget. They're more HR managers than they are operators, right? So that's where I tell people there's a word of caution. It's nice to have folks like that as advisors. Call it window dressing as you're going through the capital raise. Make sure they know your stuff. But I'm really leery about hiring, seasoned corporate folks without getting a chance to kind of ride the bike a little bit, right? So what I suggest is bring them on as advisors. And again, we work with a lot of companies, and some companies are like, well, I've seen their decks where they list these incredible bios, and then we dig in and going, okay, so where do these guys fit in the organization? Oh, they're advisors. Okay, where's the agreements? I don't see any agreements in your data room. Oh, well, it's just then it's like, timeout. Like, no agreements? Okay, well, you need to have these people under agreements. So if you can find a good advisor, mentor, potential executive, be serious and get them under an agreement, right? That's one. Bring him in as an advisor first. Just don't throw the keys to them. Be like, here, you just drive my car and let's go. Test it out, right? No one's going to be more in tune to your deal than you are, right? And don't get enamored by the shiny object, beautiful background, right? The other thing is, when you bring them in as an advisor, is what works, to your point, is how do you get these folks that you are used to making a ton of money? It's, one, have a sober salary if you are going to put them on a salary. But there can be incentives and really the incentives drive from equity, right? So when we work with different, our clients, and going through this of going, once we know where your valuation sits, we work backwards and be like, okay, you thought you were a $20 million company, you're really a 10, or vice versa. You thought you were 3, but you're really 10, right? So knowing where your valuation is before you start giving away your equity like it's candy. I mean, we've had a couple companies that we interact with that have gone through our mastermind, that are solid operators, great technology, but there is that a little bit an intimidation factor of, can I really do this? And so they bring on these advisors and or partners. And I've seen people give equity like right out of the gate, 12%, 20%, fully vested, right? I'm like, you got to stop that, back things up. Let's start over. You don't let anybody vest 100%, right? We've done 4-year vesting schedules and 2-year vesting schedules, but that way you give them something tangible, which is an agreement. You give them equity at a decent valuation, right? And typically advisors can get, depending on their role and how active they are, 50 basis points, like 0.5%, maybe 1% to 2%. General rule of thumb is if you have a funded company and you're hiring a CEO, maybe 5 to 10%, depend, and let that vest, right? Because if they're a bad apple, you want to be able to cut that and not have all your equity go out the door. So vesting schedules are key, understanding your valuation, then work backwards and find out what really is a decent amount. Because this one client that we're working with, the valuation is through the roof. And this isn't this isn't a blue sky, like I got this beautiful, I'm going to be the next Google. They actually have the hardware to do this. And when we finally went through that exercise, their eyes opened up going, whoa, like they were just about to let a huge, multiple millions out the door, and they stopped it. So it's, once you do that though, and that's the challenge, and this is why we like to work with these early stage companies at that level, it's because once you put those agreements in place, or once you throw out a number verbally, as you know, it's there, right? To walk that back could be painful and somewhat difficult and create a lot of tension. So, kind of sum things up, it's a real agreement, equity, vesting schedule, and then if they come on as an actual officer in the company, then you worry about salaries. But most advisors that want to jump into an early stage company aren't looking for, cash on top of that, unless they're going to be operators in the organization.
And this happens all the time, more than we think in this industry. And it's so interesting. Unless they talk to someone like yourself, Greg, that's able to help them navigate that. I was underwriting and doing some due diligence in this one company, and the valuation was 100 million. And one of the people owned about 22% of the company, but they're no longer with the company. And I'm sitting there going, how in the world did he get, he was one of the co-founders, whatever, and the story, but it seemed like they still separated, cordially, whatever. But the point was, he owned 22% of the company, and I was unbelievable. I was like, wow, what in the world? But I mean, you see this all the time, and I'm so glad you kind of bring this point up where have these conversations, but vested schedules, the way you think about it, the way you navigate it. But also, you don't have to give 20, 25%. Give them, 3, 5%. That's fine. And over a larger company and so forth. So I'm really glad you're bringing that up. I'm also curious, when you're navigating, some founders have co-founders already come to you, right? But some are looking for, and this is, I was talking to someone at Y Combinator where they're able to facilitate these kind of relationships where, hey, if you're looking to be a co-founder, or if you're a founder and you're looking for a co-founder, or you're, vice versa, making sure that there are synergistic relationships, because everybody needs a yin and a yang, right? Always this collaborative kind of environment. How do you help individuals collaborate or navigate that, finding a good co-founder that compensate for their weakness or their weak parts?
It's great. It's a great point. So one of the things that I think is unique about what we do is that we have kind of our full-time team that's doing this stuff. And then we have a very broad and deep bench of advisors. These are highly skilled executives, but also have the entrepreneurial background. Like, they're not just executives, they've done startups. That's a prerequisite to be able to do this. They've also spent a lot of time with us. We let them ride alongside in deals before we actually bring them on, before you even see them on the website. But we have a pretty broad bench. So a lot of the times when we're working with companies is as we have a 90-day due diligence process that we do in our mastermind, and it usually can be compressed in a faster time frame. But oftentimes, once we get under the hood and understand what they're doing, we can identify where the weaknesses are, or more importantly, where the opportunities are. So it's not just about weaknesses. It's going, gosh, we had one client where they're making a medical device that would go really well in the VA and also go really well in children's hospitals. Well, once we got into it, realized they had intellectual property. He's a good operator. His deal came together. We helped him put it together. We're like, okay, this is solid. You need, I think he's probably in his 30s. He's a sharp guy, but he needs firepower. like some serious weight on his team because he's a first time capital raiser, first time, company owner. So we brought on a friend of mine who's the former chief medical officer of 22 Shriner hospitals, right? So that helps, right? Another gentleman who went through our mastermind a year and a half ago, who ran a $3 billion health insurance company out of the state of Michigan. He was tied into a lot of private equity, a lot of venture. He likes this thing, so he's going to be involved, right? So we bring advisors in around companies that we've vetted and that we feel good about. They get to, again, experience, because a lot of people can get excited about a startup. I mean, that's a natural thing, especially if it's a cool technology or they see the opportunity. It's just there's one thing about being excited as an advisor or a high speed, executive. And there's another side of the coin of, can you actually get stuff done, right? Can you put points on the board? So that's why I go back to this advisory, status or engagement, because we'll bring them in. We work with the whole team and they work, we all work as a team together. And then it's up to the client, the portfolio company of going, hey, I really like this particular individual. I really want them on my team. Like, can we do that? And so we have that flexibility of putting the two together. And if you need them, on your advisory board, or you need them as an officer in your company because that's the gaping hole that you have, yeah, you do what you need to do. But we make sure everything's done completely legit, the right agreements, the right structure, but we de-risk it not only for the company, right, making sure they're getting, not just a shiny object, but we also de-risk it for the advisors because we don't want them to have a bad experience either, right? So we're able to kind of facilitate those relationships and make it work.
So I think it's so important to bring this up because one of the reasons why I want to have you on, not only because of your experience and your background, but also the mastermind in regards to the way you structure this. Because I had access to a friend at Friends Incubator kind of process, my VC incubator, and it's very like educational, which is really great. I learned a lot; it was wonderful. But what I've come to realize is these founders, because I wanted to come in as like an investor, like how would a founder come through this? What were they looking through? The kind of funnel process. And what I realized was it was not contextual, right? Some of these founders are asking questions. Hey, what's specific to my situation? I got these skills, but I don't have these skills. How do I navigate this kind of thing? What's going on? It's very contextual. There's a lot of factors that go into everybody's situation, everybody's kind of specific, dynamics that are going on. And what I think is so interesting, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but you've been able to facilitate where it's a very contextual experience where it's like you guys are sitting down hands on and really taking them hand by and looking at their slide deck, looking at their marketing, understanding them at a very micro level, their DNA of the company. Like, what does that look like? Is that correct on how I'm interpreting that?
Absolutely. And we've had people come to our mastermind that worked at these other or had investments or started with one of these bigger accelerators. And that's what they say when they work with us is going, you guys actually got hands-on and got under the hood and understood what was going on so much that we can give a pitch, right? We actually did that for one of our clients. We're now a shareholder in the company, but he had never given an investor pitch before, had never put together a PowerPoint before. He was just a hustler and had made a lot of money in the past and was trying to make a bigger play. And so the only reason we can do that is because we actually spent time as a partner, really working with them side by side and trying to understand what's up here and then how to articulate that into an actual executable strategy. So that's one element. But, I've seen some of these folks where and there's nothing against it. Like self-education is huge, right? It's exploded, really since, COVID, which that was the positive that came out of it. One, it's Zoom and we don't need fancy sets and it's just getting knowledge, right? Getting that injection. I use the analogy of the Matrix, right? It's one of my favorite movies, but putting that spike in the back of the head and now you can fly the helicopter, right? It's like, you can learn this, but there's only so much that you can get by just reading a book or, watching, webinars, or, you can absorb a lot of stuff, but especially with this topic and raising capital and commercialization and launching and all that stuff that goes on in between all that, there's nothing more valuable than having somebody, actually hands-on in your stuff. So we're investing 40 plus hours in each client that comes through our doors to the mastermind. We screen very heavily, but once we get people in, we put up a data room. There's training modules you put them through, and then that way when we get face to face, which is multiple times a week, we're in their stuff. Like we're redlining, we're going 6, 7 different versions of documents going back and forth. It may seem like a lot, but that's what you need. You need a critical set of eyes to really get into your stuff, to get you out of your own head and really dial things in. And then once we know what we know, we can blast them out to our investors, partners. We teach them how to hunt. And, that's a fun part that we get to do, is going, hey, by the way, if you're in Nevada, we've got, you talking to, these 12 people, right? So but you don't get that from typical most VCs, and you don't get that from accelerators and university levels. Universities will teach you how to build your widget and how to make it, what it costs, but rarely they teach you how to put everything together and then raise the capital and launch your business. So what I tell entrepreneurs is going, if you're looking at doing this, even if it's downstream a bit, and this on the entrepreneurial side, is having that knowledge opens up a whole new window of how to look at things, how to grow your own company, how to buy companies, how to sell company. I mean, it just gives you that level of knowledge that is attainable. It's just you really getting tactile and hands-on is what we do. We don't get involved with companies that say, hey, just, invest in us, or, help us raise capital. It's just, there's plenty of that. There's plenty of people that do that. If we can't get hands-on and dramatically move the needle, then we don't engage.
Yeah, and with the mastermind, you guys are able to infuse so much heat and so much intensity to be able to really sharpen these individuals at a high level after the mastermind. So I want to just foot stop on that, because I just thought that was really interesting. There's very few incubators and accelerators out there that I've heard of that have a very hands-on approach, right? And it's not a bad thing or a negative thing. I just think it's a beneficial thing when you see someone like yourself that's able to give some context. Because even coming back on what you said, even when you do read a book or you watch a YouTube video, there's a lot of times there's conflicting arguments, right? Or you go to a conference and say, oh, this guy got this idea, and so that there's that shiny object syndrome. Instead of just focusing on the path and focusing on money-making activities, or those activities that will pull the money level further and so forth. So Greg, I really appreciate you being on here and just talking about this. I just think it's so important, and definitely unpacking the mastermind and what you guys have been able to do at Pure Ventures. Branding, digital marketing, sales, e-com distribution, a lot of things that go into it. Even the operational side of things, and how to structure the deals with your employees or your future employees as you're growing the team and structuring that correctly. For those that want to reach out to you, Greg, how do they reach out to you, be part of what you got going on? You got a lot of amazing resources on your website and LinkedIn, of course. So I want to make sure I highlight that. But how do they reach out to you, my man?
The best way is just to go to the website. I mean, if you go to Purim Ventures, which is Purim, as in Mary, Purim Ventures with an S, so purimventures.com, you'll find a way to call us, get a hold of us, send us an email, or even book some time. And I typically take a lot of these screening calls just because this is the nature of the stuff that I like to get into. We do have a team that screens them initially, but I'll usually end up talking directly to people if they're looking at this mastermind structure, because I lead it. It's one of those things where I've got team members that have a lot of M&A experience, a lot of public-private experience, but the mastermind stuff is something that I just like, because I like to get my hands dirty and seeing that light bulb go on with companies, and just seeing them in a very short period of time go from a B- to an A+, and actually understand what they're doing. And be able to grasp it and know that they're, going to be more dangerous when they go out to the investment community. But yeah, going to the website's the best way to do it.
And make it easy, very simple. I will put all those links in the description below. So make sure you reach out to him, connect with him on LinkedIn, as well as Purim Ventures. He's got like I mentioned, a lot of resources on that website there. So make sure you reach out and connect with him. And one of the things I want to highlight, I always found it very interesting in business, it's focusing on the right thing at the right time in the right sequence. Sometimes a lot of founders are focusing on one thing, but sometimes you got to get, phase 1 first before you get phase 2 and phase 3, right? And so I find it so interesting being able to have someone that's been able to exit properly, but also has an amazing team like Greg and his ecosystem to be able to help you navigate that, because everything is contextual. There are a lot of factors that are going through a lot of founders and where they're going. as well as investors as well. For those, you want to align yourself with someone that has a very active approach because it mitigates the risk. Right? It really does, quite frankly, because if you're able to say, hey, you know what, we've got a really good success rate because we take a very hands-on approach, that drastically mitigates your risk instead of just writing a check and, spray and pray kind of approach. So Greg, I really appreciate you being on here, guys. Those links are in the description. That is my friend, the managing director, of Pure Ventures, the one and only Greg Downey. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.